morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for November's edition of Health Bytes with Region 3. We're so pleased to welcome this month's speaker, our friend Lindsay Blake. Lindsay Blake is the Clinical Services Coordinator and a professor at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in Little Rock, Arkansas. As the Clinical Services Coordinator, Dr. Blake directs the library's clinical programs in the hospital. Dr. Blake has been really busy over the last year with graduation from Arkansas State University with a doctorate in higher education administration in May, promotion to full professor in July, admittance to the Ozel Leadership Fellowship in August, and just last month she was elected president-elect of the South Central chapter of MLA. Previously, she has held many offices and worked extensively in the Southern chapter of MLA and MLA committees and caucuses, serving as the chair of the awards committee for the Research Caucus, an editor of the NARS newsletter, chair of the Leiter Lecture, and many years as a member of juries, committees, and caucuses and sections. In today's Health Bites, our speaker will give a presentation on a guide to getting started in research and publishing. Thank you so much for being our guest speaker this morning, Dr. Blake, and I'll turn everything over to you.
Thank you very much, Bailey. All right, so as Bailey said, we're going to talk today about getting started in research and publishing. And when I sent this title, I wasn't completely done, but they need to get all the stuff together. So we're also going to throw in a little bit of presentation in here, which I usually think is part of our publishing scholarly work anyway. So we're going to kind of cover that whole range. Basic objectives. We want to create a list for possible publications and collaborators. So I do encourage you throughout this presentation that if you have any journals you published in, newsletters, anything else that you think are great places, throw those in there. And for yourself, personally make a list of people. I have a whole area here on talking about collaborators. So make a list of people that you think would be good people to approach to work with. We want to discuss how to approach different types of writing and presentation in this one. And then we want to explore a little bit about the IRB. All right, so here's how I plan to approach this. We're going to start with talking a little bit about collaborators and ideas. So the who and what of this whole process. Then we're going to talk about getting started. So how. Look at a little bit of research in IRB and why, and then presentation and publication. So when and where. So you can see this is half from my library background, half from my journalism background. I've got to know all the question answers. And then at the very end, I have some resources for everyone. Again, I really encourage, I don't think I have the end all be all here. If you have any resources to share, please place those in the chat so that we can all share them. I also want to quickly do a disclaimer here. I'm not trying to sell anything today, so not that kind of disclaimer. But my disclaimer is this is a kind of high-level overview of some of these areas. I want to break it down and try to make things a little bit easier for you to approach each of these. Whether you're a beginner or you're an intermediate, I hope there's some tips and tricks in here that you can take away from this. But one of the things I really want to put across is these are a lot of my own personal experiences I'm talking about, things that I did, people I worked with, the ways that I interacted. So that's not going to be the same for everyone. And again, if there are things that work for you, when we're talking about in that area, feel free to put that in the chat because there are a lot of different things. But I just want you to know this is my experience. And so this is not how to do it necessarily. This is just some ideas to get you started. All right, so we're going to start collaborators and ideas, but before we do that, we're going to take a brief poll just so we can get an idea of the experience of this group right now. So Margie's going to put that up for us. And I would just like to know exactly the things that you all have done. So this is kind of fun to watch. This is just going to help me gauge a little bit about where to focus some of my presentation and where a lot of you have a lot of experience, so you might not need as much information. All right, looks like most people have got it in. So it looks like we have a lot of poster presentations. We do have some research, so that's good. About 50% have done some sort of research, and a little bit of everything else. So that's really good. All right, close that out and get started. All right, I said I'm going to start with ideas and collaborators. And again, this is where I really want you to start making that list as I'm talking to you about people you may think of. And I've got a whole bunch of my librarian colleagues that I work with right here. So my question is, who do you collaborate with? And you want to think about this in different ways of why do you want to collaborate with this person? How is this going to be beneficial? We're going to talk a little bit about this, but I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm collaborating with the various people on the screen here. So on the bottom here, we have Brenda Linares. You might know her. She's the current MLA president. She and I were actually paired for a webinar for the Early Career Librarians Initiative in the South Central chapter, which is why we got started working together. But we felt like we worked together so well on that, we went on to do some paper presentations and some other collaborations together. So this was just a chance meeting, but we collaborated really well together. So we've gone on to do other things. Over here, we have the other clinical librarian with me, Lauren Tong. She's probably listening somewhere today and super excited I put her picture on here. But as another clinical librarian, she shares similar interests with me. We work in the same area. So we can talk and look into presenting about things that have to do with clinical librarianship. In the middle here, we have Dee Dee Rios. And Dee Dee and I have known each other forever, and we always said we were going to collaborate on something. And then we finally sat down one day and said, you know what? We just have to decide what to collaborate on. And so we did that. And we collaborated on collaboration. So that's the fun part there. I'm going to show you a little bit about our results later. And then these last three here are colleagues of mine. So up here, Kay Strawn, up on our Northwest campus in Arkansas, Caroline Anna Carrico down here in the corner. In the middle, my supervisor, Susan Spielman. So of course, these are people that I work with on a daily basis. So we have a lot of chance to interact, to discuss, to come up with ideas, and to think of things. And that's one of those things that is really important to us. To really get some of those ideas out and then find out who has similar ideas, who has similar interests, and then go from there. So I want to approach a little bit about why you may want to collaborate with some of these people. You can certainly do projects on your own, and some of us may feel far more comfortable doing that. But I would just approach some reasons about why you may want to collaborate with others. First of all, it helps to keep you accountable. I don't know about you all. I work well under deadlines. If I have a way open time, there's a lot of other work things I have to do. If you have somebody else counting on you, however, that means that I really need to get that done because that's another thing on my priority list. So that really helps keep me accountable, and it helps to keep your partners accountable as well. It helps you to share the work. So sometimes the division of labor in these projects can be difficult, but that's one of the things you need to sit down, kind of go through everything, and then you have somebody that's going to help you with the process of research, of writing, of presenting, and that can be really nice. You, of course, have more diverse ideas and solutions when you come across problems. So it's really nice to have more than one voice in the room. Usually you really only need one other person to bounce ideas off, but if you have a bigger group, 3, 4, 5, then you have that many more people that can really help you come up with solutions, can come up with good ideas, can help with the direction of your projects. It also helps to make sure you have balance. So I'm more of a worker bee. And a leader. I like to get things done, all right? But I'm not necessarily super creative in my ideas. I'm not a great idea person. So it helps me to have somebody who's creative, who has those ideas, who has those different thoughts than I do. And then I can be there to say, okay, here's our deadline. So having that mix of people really helps you get stuff done. And just when you're working with people, I enjoy working with all of these people right here. I consider them all friends. However, it's nice to work with your friends. Do that if you can. But remember, it's great to work with people who are reliable. And until you do a project with someone, you don't always know who that is. But it can be one of those lessons you learn. Now, again, to build these collaborations, we got to build a professional network. So where are we going to find these folks? And I'm going to say one of the biggest areas where I found professional collaborators is through associations. So we have plenty of places that we can look for them. And I started with just the big one, MLA. You may also attend SLA or ALA, great places to find people. Go to those sessions at the conferences, join the caucuses, the sections, the committees, whatever it is, but get involved in those things that you're interested in, and then meet fellow people who are interested in those things, and then start working with them. That is the greatest way to do it. So we can start at MLA. For some people, this is a little overwhelming. This may be expensive, and it is a big conference. So if you're the type that doesn't want to jump right into that big soup, think about this. Your regional conferences. I think when I first started in librarianship, this is where I really found my home. So I've just put 3 examples here. South Central chapter and Southern chapter I've both been a member of, and then the Mid-Continental chapter. Of course, there are more, and I've worked with people in more than these chapters, but I just wanted a little example here to show you. This is really the place. This is a smaller conference. It's much more collegial just because it is a smaller group and people tend to know each other. And it's really easy to talk to paper presenters, to talk to the poster presenters, not just when they're doing their presentation, but later to get together with them and work together. So something to think about. You also want to think about maybe some of those even smaller organizations. So I put up here a couple that I have belonged to, the Georgia Health Sciences Library Association when I lived in Georgia. So we're going even smaller with those health sciences librarians, but we are also spreading out a little bit because these state organizations, so Georgia Health Sciences, and then now currently AHIP, the Arkansas Health Information Professionals, this brings in health sciences professionals that may work at colleges that are not health sciences focused. So they may only be a liaison to nursing because that's all their college has. But then you get a little bit wider category of people that may have slightly different interests that may align with yours. I've also thrown in here the Early Career Librarian Initiative. So this is something through the South Central chapter, but I believe it's spread to at least one other chapter. And it is a wonderful place to join and learn more about being new to the profession. We also, of course, have the new members caucuses with MLA. And then, of course, there are going to be committees and caucuses and interest groups all over the place. And just don't be afraid to reach out and join those groups that you're interested in. Librarians, for the most part, are a very welcoming group. And if you want to talk to somebody, we will find time to make that happen. All right. This last slide on collaborators, I just want to remind you that collaborating with your librarian colleagues is great. I do that a lot too, but you don't need to just collaborate with them. You can collaborate with a lot of different folks. So these are some of the clinicians and researchers that I collaborate with or have collaborated with. And again, I meet these folks in different places in different ways, but sometimes you need to grab a hold of those opportunities when you see them and turn them into something. So for instance, Dr. Michael Wilson over here is in our education, our emergency department. He was a search consult. And once I sat down, started talking to him about this, we got more and more involved. And I'm now working on a lot of different projects with him because his primary focus is research with a little clinical on the side. Over up top here is my friend Francis Young. We actually started working together in the same university at Augusta University in Georgia on the evidence-based medicine class. So she's an epidemiologist. She was teaching that class, and I was helping out with the evidence-based medicine portion. So it's biostatistics and evidence-based medicine. And because we worked together so well, we started experimenting over 4 or 5 years with different ways we could approach learning objectives in that class. And we wrote up a few papers about those learning objectives. So working with her, doing those different projects in class and kind of showing outcomes of that were great projects. In the middle here, and I'm going to kind of lump these 4 together here. Starts with this guy down here, Nadir, and he actually is an anesthesiologist here at my university. However, he introduced me to his friend Pervez. They both graduated from the UK. Jani also did. And so now Pervez is at Stanford. Jani is in British Columbia. And then we have Kareem over here who's still in the UK. So I created this kind of network, just starting with one local, but working with them with collaborators throughout the world. And this was more of a balancing act, and it's not something I started with for sure. But they kept reaching out to me, and as I was able, I made sure that I was able to help them. But I also connected them with librarians at their own institutions whenever possible. All right, I want to move on to the idea section. And this is where, again, I want you to kind of write down any ideas you have. And if you want to share them to look for collaborators while we're on this, that's great too. But a few places that you may want to look for ideas. Number 1, starting with your interests. So, what brought you to this profession? Why do you like it? What interests you? When you go out day to day to work, what are the questions you have or the thoughts you have? This is one of those things where if you write these things down as you're going through it and save them, and then bounce those off somebody else. See what kind of things you can really make a project out of. The next one I have is people. So people are, for me, you can either be or you can find that idea person. So at your office, when you're networking at conferences, but these are people you can bounce ideas off and share back and forth really easily. This is my idea person. So this is Kay Strawn. Now she knows why I asked for her picture yesterday. Kay is full of ideas, but she needs somebody to bounce those off of to discuss back and forth what's practical, how we could carry it out. So she's great because she'll call every day with new ideas and we'll go through it, and some of them work out and some of them she wants to go forward with, and some of them she passes on to others, and some she works on herself. So it varies, but I love having those people around me who have a bunch of ideas, and then we can sit down and talk through it and see what's going on. And not to say I don't have ideas of my own sometimes, but I am not I'm not the creative person. I'm the get person. I'm the get stuff done person. So it's nice to have a few other people around me who have a bunch of ideas that we can kind of sort through. The last thing I have down here is, what are you doing right now? So again, what are you working on? What are you doing in your job that may be interesting to others? You may be trying a new technique in your classes. You may be trying a new way to outreach to your liaison areas. Whatever it is, you may want to see, hey, why don't I write up an abstract? I'll submit it to my regional conference and they'll review it. And if they think this is something that people really want to know, they're going to accept it. And worst case scenario is they don't. But at a lot of regional conferences, it's a great place to get started because a lot of those are things that we want to see, not just research, but projects that you're working on. So just so you know, and we're going to show this later on, my very first presentation. It was a poster presentation at a chapter conference. It was not a new service. It was not something I'd started, but it was something that was unique to my library. So I presented on that one. And people were very interested in that because of it. And the same thing, I created a CE class when I was a new librarian. And it was on, because at the time, I was the young hip tech librarian, and I was creating tutorials for our online presence. And so I did CE class to help others to do that as well. So again, sometimes parts of our job that we do just as what we do can be really helpful to others who don't know about that area or don't have as much experience there. One thing I really want to emphasize when we're looking at ideas, however, is that you really need to find ideas you're interested in that you want to really involve yourself in. So you may be invited to a project, and if it's not on a topic that you're interested in, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get through that because you really do need to dive into these things. This is why if you are interested in something, you make time to go back to it, to make sure you're pushing that project forward, to make sure you're doing the things that you need to do. All right, we're going to go to getting started, but real quickly, I just wanted to give time to see if Bailey had any questions that we needed to cover.
Just some good conversation in the chat and some plus ones to each other, talking about cold calling folks to network and throw around ideas. So, but it doesn't look like we have any questions yet.
Perfect. Okay, great. I love the conversation in the chat. Then we'll keep going. Getting started is a really short section anyway. So in getting started here, we want to talk about what it is you're doing. All right. So my picture here is my family, my dad, my two children. It's a few years ago, they got way bigger. But you can see we don't know what we're doing. They're all looking in different directions. They're all doing different things. We have no idea what's going on. So yeah, one of the first things you need to do is decide, where are you landing here? So the five areas I'm kind of going to touch on a little bit are the research, projects, grant funding, presentation, and publication. Again, this is going to be high level. We're not going to go in depth on any of these. But what I would like to posit to you is that these things are all interconnected. So this is how I like to look at it. And I learned this from a friend again when I was a young librarian. You really need to make the most of every single project you do, especially if that's an area you're interested in and you want to do more work in it. So starting with grant funding here, and of course, NLM has wonderful funding opportunities, but we also have opportunities usually through our university, through MLA, through our chapters to do projects. But if you decide to get grant funding, that's something that you can do with either a project or research. So you can use this in both areas. If you're doing a project, so for example, I am presenting on the learning outcomes from a course that I redid for the College of Medicine. This doesn't have a lot of data attached to it. I have some student feedback. This is more of a project though, but I can do both a presentation and later on, maybe I'll do a publication. Same thing with research. We might do more in-depth research on that course. I might compare student grades from students where we don't change the course and students where we do change the course. And I can still present that at my conferences and I can still write a publication later. So these things are all interconnected and you need to know that you can leverage any of these three things here into your presentations and publications. Now, I wanted to go over a few areas here that I want to remind you of when you're working on projects and research. And that is, and then later on when you start the publications and presentations, and that is whether you're working alone or whether you're working with a group, make sure you set clear deadlines. Very important. Most of us work much better under clear deadlines. Some people will still have trouble with deadlines, but they will have a lot more trouble without deadlines as well. Make sure you give work assignments. So if you have those deadlines, make sure that everybody has what they need to do by that deadline. So make sure that if you have collaborators, everybody's clear on what their assignment is and when it's due. If it's just you, you still need to make sure you know, this is what I want to get done by this time. Make sure you have regular meetings, and these can be working meetings, to keep the group on task, to remind them of the project, to keep everything moving forward. Now, a lot of times I would tell you for working meetings, We may get together as a group and we may all be just sitting there on Zoom muted, but we're all typing on our various sections of the article or working on our parts of the poster or whatever it may be. But we have set aside that time to work on that because maybe we're too busy doing it at other times. And that's an important thing to do, whether, again, you're in a group or if you're by yourself and you just need to make sure you've set aside that time because sometimes it's hard to get the individual time. I want to remind you, if you are working in a group, just to be sure to discuss authorship early. Make sure you understand how authors are going to be placed and what everyone is going to do to make that order. If you do it alphabetically, if you have the lead author, and then how people, how much work they put in, however you decide to do it. Just make sure that it is decided early on. And you may want to think about, if problems arise, how will you handle them? And this is especially true in a group, that if someone doesn't meet their deadline and they keep missing their deadline, how are you going to handle that sort of thing? So you don't necessarily need to have a firm plan in mind, I feel like, to begin with. You don't know if this is going to happen, but an idea about what we might do if this becomes a problem. All right, we're going to delve a little bit now into research and IRB. And I just want to do the basic overview of research. I feel like most of us probably know this basic research path, and it's probably not a surprise. But I find that when we remind ourselves of how simple this is as an overview, and we look at it by these individual steps, it makes it less scary. It makes something we can approach. So I'm going to use my children here again as my research example, just to walk us through and see how simple it really is. So I'm going to ask the question. My question here is, how long can I leave my children in this glass box suspended over Chicago before my husband loses his mind? As you can see, they are in a glass box. They are all over Chicago. So this is a real question I can answer. I probably can't do a literature search on this, and I'm not going to talk about literature searching today because I'm fairly certain we have plenty of resources for that, and most of us are fairly competent in this area. Or we know somebody who can help. I will develop a project base, though. How do I want to test my theory, right? I have asked the question, but how am I going to test it? Am I going to take a survey, and am I going to see how long my husband thinks he can handle this? Am I going to bring him up in person and have him watch the children and see how long he can let them sit there? I got to think of a way to make this work. Now, since this is a human studies subject, I will need to submit to the IRB. We're going to talk a little bit more about the IRB, and I put dum dum dum, but it's not really that scary. This is definitely human subjects. I have children in here. I'm putting them in mortal danger, possibly. So this will probably not be accepted by the IRB, but fortunately, these are my family members, so I didn't have to worry about it on this particular project. I have to do the work, so I actually did put the children in the box. They did it willingly. I did not force them. And then my husband came up to the top of the Willits Tower with us and witnessed said children in the box. I collected the data. How long did my husband make it? 2 minutes. 2 minutes was as long as we got on the top of Willits Tower before we had to go back down. So that's my compiling the data, and then I can write it up. This is not going to make a very long story, I realize. The write-up is not going to be as exciting, but we will talk about the order you would do that in. Let's jump into some IRB information now. Institutional Review Board. So remember, anytime you do something with human subjects, you have to submit to the Institutional Review Board. And I would like to say, if you've worked with an Institutional Review Board, you've worked with an Institutional Review Board. But these are called Institutional Review Boards because they are different from one institution to the next. They do share similar characteristics, but they are institution-based. So what I'm going to tell you is a generalization, but you may have to approach things a little bit differently. I think when we think about the IRB, this is what we have over here. We're trying to reach up for something. We're not really sure. It's big, it's high, it's scary. We don't know how we're going to get there, right? We're reaching and reaching. Are we going to make it? I don't know. But what I want to tell you is this is Charles Michael Bailey. He is my IRB administrator. He is a very nice man. And his job is to help me get my IRB submission to the IRB committee. He makes sure I have all the correct forms, that I have everything submitted, I have all my boxes checked, all of that. Now I'm going to tell you, when you're first submitting to the IRB, there's tons of questions. It is time consuming, but it's not that difficult if you know what you want to do. So, and he's there, and every IRB person I have met is very helpful. So don't be scared of them. They're there to help. Email, call, check in with them. They'll be happy to answer your questions. And if they're not, they've always pretended really well for me. So keep in mind that they are there for you. All right. They're going to be that helping hand. And what I want to show you about this picture, again, I love using the children as an example. My daughter doing her handstand. She's a gymnast. She does not need her brother's help to do a handstand, but he is going to help anyway. He's going to be her support just to back her up because he's a really good brother. And then once you've submitted all this, you kind of sit back, relax, let Michael help you out here, okay? And just try to take some deep breaths. Now, remember, for IRB submission, anytime you are working with humans, this means if you're doing a survey with librarians, which we like to do a lot, that is usually something that a lot of institutions is exempt or expedited, which means they will send it in. Michael here will take a look. He'll say, yep, this is exempt. You got everything you need. And he'll send it back with a little note that says you're good to go. Expedited means that they send it in, they double check everything a little bit more thoroughly, but they do it quickly. It doesn't go to a full IRB review. When you're interacting more directly with people, it may go to the full IRB review. Usually though, especially in health sciences universities, we're not going to be doing things with tissue or fluids or any bodily substances. And so ours are generally going to be exempt or expedited. And that depends on your review board. Now, I told you I want to talk about a little bit about writing up the results. I'm kind of skipping over collecting your data and compiling your data because that is going to depend a lot on what kind of research you do. So I don't want you to think that we're not including that. It's just that that can vary quite a bit. However, writing up your research is going to be pretty straightforward, and I'm sure many of you have seen this. So MRAD, introduction, methods, results, discussion. This is it. This is all. When you submit to MLA, to most conferences, if you're doing research, this is what you want to have. Now, this can also be used for a project presentation. Usually what I tell you is that you're kind of doing an introduction, the methods and results are usually kind of combined, and then a discussion. Now, remember in these areas, one, if we're looking at an abstract here, which was probably where we want to start, because we'll need that for either our presentation submission, or if we're writing a paper that helps us to get our thoughts organized. But as an abstract, the introduction can be pretty brief. So if we have 500 words, this might be 100. It's going to tell what you did, what your objectives are. And that can be your project objectives, that can be your hypothesis for your research, whatever that is. But what you're doing and why it's important. So kind of relate it to other things in the world. Your methods, again, an abstract, this is going to be a little bit longer, but maybe 150 out of that 500 words. Succinct, but give the information about how you went through doing this project. So if you created a survey, so maybe you did a literature search, use that to create a survey, you piloted the survey, then you sent out the survey through listservs and collected the information and did some data analysis. It doesn't have to be for abstract super in depth. When you write a paper, you're going to want to fill in some of those details. For the results, again, it's probably can be another 150 words out of your 500 for your abstract. It's not going to be a huge section though. People think, hey, this is the meat of it. This is where the information should be, but it's not really. Because remember, especially in research, this is a very strict methodology here. How you do things are in methods. Your results are what you found out. There is no interpretation. There is no crossing over of anything. It's just what you found out. When you start talking about those results is in the discussion. And this is where you put in how your results relate to other literature out there, how your results relate to, the importance of your results to your work, to others' work. That's where you put all that information. So the discussion is the really rich, big portion. And that's the part you really want to read to see how this information relates to you, to other people. Now, within your discussion, you may also have a few other areas that aren't necessarily specifically written out. And that is going to be your conclusion. So the summary, one paragraph summary of everything you have there. Any limitations for your research, and then any future research. We always want to know what you think you should do next. So those are some interesting areas you should look at. All right, we're going to move on quickly to presentation and publication, but really quickly, do we have any questions, Bailey?
Not as of yet. So if y'all have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A at the bottom, and we will read those out to Dr. Blake as they come in, whenever there's a break in the presentation. So, but no questions yet.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's move on to our presentation and publication section. So I put up the poll at the beginning, well, Margie put up the poll for me at the beginning to kind of get an idea of where our experience lies. So I put these 5 as some very common presentation types. There are more, of course, but looking at lightning talks, posters, papers, roundtables, and immersion sessions. So these are things that I've seen at our local conferences, at our chapter conferences, at MLA conferences. I would say that you should probably try every one of these at some point in your career. Probably not all at once, though. You can limit yourself. But I want to talk a little bit through the pros and cons of each as well. So a lightning talk, I'm going to tell you right now, if you are a talker and you are not great at summarizing, lightning talks are probably not great for you. If you are great at summarizing, this might be the place you want to start, because this is, you give a very brief summary of your project or research. And for a lot of us, it is hard to get information from projects or research down to such brief talking points. So even for those of us who are good at summarizing, this might be tough. But it gets your name out there, it gets your project out there, it allows you to find other people that you may collaborate with, and or if you attend these, that you want to collaborate with. So something to keep in mind. Posters, love posters, okay? A little bit more work to put the poster together, one thing, but the great part about posters is that if you're not big about standing in front of crowds and talking to them, this is a great place to start, right? You stand by your poster, you let the people come by, they ask you questions. So if you're a talker, you might reach out to people. If you want to just stand there and let people ask you questions, you can do that. Again, getting your name out, getting some information from others, and finding collaborators maybe. Paper, I have Kay and myself up here for various paper presentations. Actually, I think I'm doing a paper presentation. She's doing an immersion session. But just to show you, these are going to be those big presentations. So 12 to 15 minutes, you're standing up there really explaining how your project or your research went. Immersion sessions will have a number of people doing different things. So you may be explaining a project, you may be doing a panel, discussing an area, whatever it is. And then roundtables. So roundtables as a facilitator. So if you want to start a roundtable for one of the conferences, you would want to be somebody who was interested in this topic and wanting to meet with other people who want to talk about it. Now, you do not need to be the expert in this topic, but you need to have a few ideas and a few talking points so that when you sit down with this group of interested people, you all can exchange information pretty easily. As promised, this is my very first poster ever. It's my very first presentation or project in general. So this is probably like within the first year of being a librarian. So it was a poster on Gill Express. which talked about how we connected the public and university libraries throughout the state of Georgia. Again, I didn't come up with this. This was not novel to me, but this was something that I presented at a chapter presentation that the other states did not have, and which was a very interesting thing to do. So that's the poster. And like I say, start where you're comfortable. So this is something I was working on at the time, and I was very comfortable, as you can see. Then kind of move on. So again, I told you that I worked with Francis Young, and we talked about different doing different things in class. So this is an example of, I did a paper presentation actually, and her name should be on this, so I don't know where it went, but we designed standardized patient encounters for second-year medical students. So talking a little bit about that process. Again, not really research, but it was a project that was very interesting and the students enjoyed a lot, and so we wanted to show others. This is my collaboration with Dee Dee here, so reflecting on the development of the library research connections. So you can see her there in the corner doing our presentation for one of the virtual MLA meetings. And I went the wrong way, but from that research, I wanted to let you know, this is the way the majority of librarians get their collaborators. So you can see, most of us collaborate with people within our institution or people we've known previous institutions, but conferences, referrals, listservs, other social media. So a lot of places that we can look at. All right, I think I'm starting to run short on time, so we're going to run through Welcome to Publications because I want to make sure I touch on everything. And on this particular slide, what I want to get across to you is that publications do not have to be based on research, but they can be. They can be based on projects. They can be experience things. There are plenty of areas for you to publish, and you don't have to start at writing a research paper to publish in JMLA. That would be a great thing to aspire to. But think about non-peer reviewed journals. Think about newsletters. Think about column invites. These are all things that I have used to add to my publications. And sometimes this is a great place to get started to just practice that writing. So I want to show you again some examples from my own career. So we have here the Nursing and Allied Health Resources and Services. This is the NARS newsletter that Bailey mentioned in my introduction. I have been an editor, I was chair, so I wrote columns, and I've just written little pieces up for this that I thought would be of interest to the nursing and allied health librarians. So these can be short pieces. They have a column on new online tools that are usually 3 or 4 paragraphs. So if you have something you use that sounds interesting, you could check out the NARS newsletter and send that in. Same thing. So South Central Connections, this is our chapter newsletter where I am. And again, if you're doing a project or something, you think, this might not make it for a big presentation, but maybe I want to write it up for the local newsletter. I can find newsletter editors, say, hey, I'm interested in doing this. And they'll be like, sounds great. Please send it to us. And then one of my first publications here is from Computers and Libraries, a non-peer review publication, but it allowed me to really get started in writing and get some feedback there. And I think they even paid me like $30 an article or something. It was very exciting when I was a young librarian. But then I move on, right? So here you have some projects in library journals. So I have Medical Reference Services Quarterly. I've got another Medical Reference Services Quarterly, Journal of Consumer Health on the Internet. We have Journal of, or JLA, I forget what that stands for now, JMLA. We've got all kinds of journals that we can look at. So right now, if you had a journal that you published in or that you know you could publish in, put that in the chat for us so we can get a good idea of all the journals we might want to use just within libraries. So I've got plenty right here. Now, one of the things I want to note is that this was submitted just to the journal as full articles. On the right here, though, these patient educations, the first one was submitted. It was about the piloting of our course. The second one was actually an answer to a call for columns for the Journal of Consumer Health on the Internet. So you can see it's a patient education column. Here's the editors. And then here is our actual project being carried out. And lastly, then I move on to all those clinical researchers. These are some things we're working on there. So some systematic reviews that I have worked on with them. All right, we're almost at the end here, but I want you to go on with some things to remember when you are doing publication. So target your journal early on, find out what your requirements are. What's the word length? What font do they want to use? How do they want the citations? These are not things that you may do in the first, but you're going to want to know them. The big thing you want to know, however, is what kind of articles they accept, and you want to know how they arrange their articles. So get that so you can start the structure off correctly. Second thing before you start writing, read some other articles from that journal just to get an idea of how much variety or how much standardization they want in their articles. And it also kind of gives you some ideas about writing style. Remember, you can submit an article on a topic you presented on. There is some debate about this, but I find it okay to present at more than one conference. If I present a conference at a local conference like AHIP, I may still want to present at something like South Central because that is a different audience. And I may still want to present at something like MLA because, again, this is a different audience. Now, as I'm working through a project, those may change slightly. I may adjust it to the audience. But again, I could even do something like if I go to a completely different conference, like I believe this week is the Charleston conference. So if I'm going and presenting there too, well, that's a completely different audience than South Central, although they're about the same size. So something to think about. But once you've done all that, you can also write that up into an article. Now, keep in mind, you can only publish one article per data set per project. You saw the two I had there. One was on the pilot information, one was on the actual project. So there's still two different areas that I looked at. And remember, really important here, you can only submit your article to one journal at a time. So write it up, submit it to the journal, find out what you're doing. If you're not accepted, that's okay. Take a look at another journal, see what they need for their write-up, adjust, and submit again. But just one at a time. All right, last area I have is resources. And just reminders. Of course, National Library of Medicine, your network is in here somewhere. They, of course, have grant funding. They, of course, have continuing education opportunities. But as Brian Leaf is always telling us, they have so much more. So make sure you take advantage of them. We've got like all kinds of them on this presentation today, and they would love to help you. It's their whole job. MLA, so developing skills. So check out all your professional associations, not just your MLA, regional, state, local. Look for those webinars. Look for those colleagues with similar interests. Collaborate on projects. Look for leadership and research opportunities. So I put some examples here like MLA-RTI, the Research Training Institute, or the Rising Stars for leadership opportunities. Continue education. This professional development slide here is from the old website because, quite frankly, it was a lot easier to understand. But those things are all still on the new website. And then look to your institutions, not only for training and CE, but for money and for networking. All right, I want to put my contact information in here. And oh man, I thought I had a different picture of the kids. Well, you get the same picture of the kids again. Biggest thing to know is that my email is the best way to contact me because I am clinical. I am not in my office all the time. And then just to finish up, I do have a list of resources that will be available for download. These are not necessarily things I used in the presentation, but they are some good places to kind of get, again, overviews of these areas. And I'm going to turn it back over for any questions.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. There is so much good conversation in the chat and resource sharing and talking about, how to get started with things like posters or book reviews even. Someone had a really great idea to have like a one-pager about your poster to hand out at poster sessions, to just, in case you don't get to cover everything you want to cover while you're talking to someone for 30 seconds or whatever it is. So but yeah, there's just been a lot of great resource sharing. So y'all feel free to go ahead and continue doing that. You do have a couple of questions here, so I'll go ahead and ask those, and y'all feel free to continue typing questions into the Q&A. Could you please explain the difference between the results section and the discussion section in a published paper?
Okay. And this is for research papers, let's say quantitative research. So when you're working with numbers, when you're working with some sort of numbers, let's say we do a survey and we want to talk about, again, I showed that slide with where we find our institutional partners. So my question was, hey, where do you find institutional partners? And I gave a number of possible, possible places and another so people could put in whatever they wanted to. Now, when I report that in results, it's basically going to be that slide you see. I say, we asked where you find partners. Here's where you find partners. Numbers. I don't tell you anything about what I think about that data. I just give you that information. Now, I can present it visually. I can write it out. But I just do that. Now, when I get to the discussion portion, then I say, hey, we notice a lot of people collaborate, mostly with institutional colleagues or with colleagues from former institutions. And we think this is because it's a lot easier to get together with people and talk to them on a regular basis and to set up research meetings and to have those impromptu run in, oh, I have an idea things, than it might be if it's somebody you don't work with, you don't know, you just meet at a conference. But we notice that a lot of people meet people at conferences and they get ideas there. So you kind of go into explaining, hey, this is why we think the numbers are. We pull in literature. We found from Ross and Rachel that this finding people at conferences was much harder. And they found that actually they said XYZ. So pull in literature, do those things in discussion. But in the results, you really just put those numbers. Now, again, if you have qualitative research, that results and discussion are kind of smushed together because you can't really talk about results without talking about what people say and how it affects. And if you're doing a project, that doesn't make sense either.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we have kind of a more zoomed out question, so buckle up. How do you see AI changing the landscape of research in librarianship?
Ooh, okay. That is a really big question. I am foreseeing that there's lots of things I cannot currently foresee, but I know right now by some of the presentations that I attended and things I have seen that one, we're using AI as a research area on its own to see how it affects librarianship and how it affects the work we do. Two, that a lot of people are using it to get ideas for research or how to carry out research. So some of those beginning steps to gather information about, hey, how could I approach this question? Is this a good question? What are some other questions around this that might be better to ask? So kind of that diving in to things. In a wider area here, I think it can definitely affect research because we already have data that helps us to, or software that helps us to do data analysis of like qualitative research. So taking those interviews or focus group information and putting them in and kind of physically going through them. But AI could certainly be something that we could put that information in at some point in time, and it would actually do the synthesis for us. It can help us pull out information for the literature searches. So I think there's a lot of ways we can use AI that will help boost our productivity while still keeping that intellectual property about ideas and how we present them ourselves. I hope that's good.
That's great. Thank you. So I think that's all the time we have questions for today. Dr. Blake, if you don't mind typing your email into the chat one more time. Oh, I see. Kay just typed it in. Thanks, Kay.
Yeah, so he knows it.
So lots of kudos in the chat. I just want to extend my thanks to everyone for joining us today. And of course, an extra special thanks to Dr. Blake for sharing your expertise with us. And we look forward to seeing all of you at next month's Health Bites with Region 3. With that, I'm going to hand everything back over to Margie, who has some information about CE and also next month's session. So thank you, Dr. Blake.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.